And I had to go for, when they did the North Walk, he told me to go for hip x-rays, and I went to Clark this morning and I did hip x-ray.
Hello.
It could be, because the body's better now, it seems to be really hip. It's falling apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you? I haven't seen you since before the, do we have to wear a mask?
No.
No, you don't mind?
No, I know.
Since
Nope.
before the
Optional.
pandemic, and now I came back, you're so good.
Oh,
I loved it.
good.
Can I just ask you about the promise, the next one?
Yeah.
Who's the author of it?
Not cote-saint-luc, not that
Yeah, I
one.
know, because
Because that's the,
I think I read
yeah, I
that
think
one.
there are a whole bunch of books called The
There
Promise.
is.
So this one is a South African writer by the name of Damon Galgut.
Damon
G-A-L-G.
Does the library have it?
I think so. I know.
Yeah, okay, or I can put it on my Kindle, Damon Gallagher, thank you.
Galgut. G-A-L-G-U-T.
Oh, Gallagher,
Not
okay.
Galgut. G-A-L-G-U-T.
And we are at 2 o'clock. And I've let everybody into our virtual room as well. We have 4 people here. We must begin.
We must begin. Okay. Hello. So let's see, live people. Oh, another live person coming.
For those of you listening in, this is your prompt to come in person next time.
Yes, please.
It's nice to be in
I mean, it's
person.
up to you to do what you like, but I really like seeing people and interacting with people. So, okay. So this is Ann Tyler, who is familiar to some others. Yeah. It's her 24th novel. I think she's written, maybe she has a collection of short stories or something else, but basically novels. At one point she said, I read in an interview that she said that she tried short stories, but she doesn't really think she's very good at them. Although one reviewer said that her writing does have sometimes a quality of short storyness about it, so but she writes novels, so her 24th novel. Ann Tyler is 80 years old now, and she's been writing for many years, so she's really a veteran novelist. Have you read, lots of other books? I can't remember the titles. You can't.
Maybe this.
Okay, so just to give you an idea.
Yeah, go back a bit. I remember reading it years ago.
Yes, well, that's it, because they go back so many years, and I
There
remember
was one in particular.
30 years ago reading a book by her. So her first one, I don't know if anybody would have read the early ones. If Morning Ever Comes, The Tin Can Tree, A Slipping Down Life, The Clockwinder, Celestial Navigation, Searching for Caleb, Earthly Possessions, Morgan's Passing. So those are the early ones. Then there was Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, which I think was the one that made her famous. So, and I don't have the date wrong. I think Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant was in the 80s. Then came The Accidental Tourist, which
that was
and that was made into a film. Right?
Yes, of course.
Yes, that was the film. I don't know, I was 1985 she wrote that.
William Hurt.
Yes, William Hurt, that's right. Then there was Breathing Lessons.
Yes, I read that.
Saint Maybe, Ladder of Years, A Patchwork Planet, Back When We Were Grown-Ups, The Amateur Marriage, Digging to America, Noah's Compass, The Beginner's Goodbye, A School of Blue Thread.
Yes, I read that.
Vinegar Girl, which was, you know what that one was? That was when she decided to take one of Shakespeare's plays, and I think that was that Merchant of Venice, her take on Merchant of Venice? But anyways, that was a little bit of a digression from her usual. Then Clock Dance, and the previous book before this, which I haven't read, which got really good reviews. It sounds like it's a bit different from her family saga kind of stories, which she often writes, was called Redhead by the Side of the Road. So that the main character is a middle-aged, young officer that I have. So a lot of books. So this is the 24th book. It was published last year, 2022. And it's a novel that spans a period of 60 years, basically. It starts, if you remember, well, not the opening chapter isn't this, but the years start in 1959 when the Garrett family goes on a vacation. The first vacation they ever take, and then it goes up to COVID time, and she mentions COVID, which she talks about in different interviews, whether the decision, because she doesn't usually put anything contemporary, anything of what's going on in the outside world in her books, maybe a sort of a slight allusion here or there, but she put COVID in, which was a very definite conscious decision. So she said in an interview, yeah?
When I looked it up, I didn't know, I wrote a website.
Yeah.
And it said there's no information here.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what I saw. The one thing that surprised me, it said it falls in a category of historical fiction. You find that? I don't know. Historical fiction. Historical fiction. I don't understand why it would say that.
Never know something.
But if you check it, maybe you should look it up.
That's interesting, historical fiction. Yeah.
Check.
No.
Whereas
I'm looking.
after they went to on vacation is considered historical.
I don't know.
COVID.
Because of COVID, historical fiction? I mean, I don't know. Or like you said, 1959 going on vacation.
Yeah,
Is historical
exactly.
fiction? I don't know, that's very odd.
That's odd.
I mean, I don't know what the technical definition.
You are correct. It is under historical fiction, and I feel old.
That is
Why did you say
amazing.
that strange?
Very.
Why would that be historical fiction?
I guess anything.
What, if it's older
So,
than
so if it's
Okay.
what if it's like 1990? Is that historical fiction now?
Maybe 1959 to what's going
Well,
on.
what's the definition? What would you classify historical fiction in a, like, as a cataloging?
Generally, it's the publisher that decides because whatever they have as a read-alike
Yeah.
would dictate where it would go. And if historical fiction is very trendy one year, they try to put as many things as possible in historical fiction.
That's misleading. That's not what I expect. That's not what I expect from historical.
Because the
No,
definition
absolutely
is
not.
any setting related to past events, but is fictional. I mean, past events, we could
Yeah.
argue is,
59. I mean,
it's a past event.
That's very,
to me, like,
well, yeah. No, that's very odd. I would say family story,
Yeah.
A psychological.
it does say other things too, but one of the things is historical fiction, which I thought was really big.
The primary one says multi-generational family saga. That's the primary one.
Yeah.
But you are correct, historical fiction's in there too.
I thought it was strange, that's why I wanted to ask you about that.
I think we'll stick to the multi-generational family saga because the historical fiction part is. So she says that writing this novel helped to keep her sane during the pandemic. She says, I was isolated like so many people were, but there was a whole crowd of people that I was living with virtually on the page and in my head. And that helped me a lot. Because she has 2 daughters. I'll tell you a little bit about her just to refresh your memories, because she has a connection to Montreal, which I always remember from the first book that I read by her back in the 1980s. And as I said, she didn't plan on putting COVID into her book, but as the pandemic dragged on, you remember at the beginning it was going to be 2 weeks, and then maybe a month, and then here we are 3 years later. She said so she put it in. It has a brief, poignant appearance in the book at the end. And she said when she was writing it, I thought, well, I don't think I can really avoid it because I don't really know when this was going to end, because she was writing and it's still COVID. I mean, COVID's still around, but it was, let's say, in 2020, 2021. And she said, so I don't know how far to set my story in the future not to have it, because we didn't know how long is this going to go on for. So she said, I thought to myself, okay, I'll still just use it. I guess, she said, I was trying to have an imaginary happy life for myself, as I always tried to do in my books, so therefore I couldn't have made it dark. And it's not dark. I mean, she has a bit about COVID at the end, but it has little, pieces to it, references, but it's in reference really to the family story. So she has won, among her awards, she won the Pulitzer Prize for her fiction in 1989 for the book Reading Lessons, and she won the National Book Critics Circle Award for The Accidental Tourist in 1985, among a host of other nominations for her critically acclaimed work, Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant. I think that was the one that really brought her to the attention of the reading public. a spool of blue thread also, and apparently this previous one, Redhead by the Side of the Road. So I think if anybody likes her writing, try and find that one. And, you know, where does the title of the book come? We have our ideas of where it comes from, but she only really mentions it at the end of the book, where one of the characters, two of the characters are having a conversation, and that's where you get what the meaning of French braid is. So the novel begins with a modern day, like, remember the first scene. So basically the book is divided into 8 chapters, and each one sort of, except for the first one, is more or less a decade. But in the opening chapter is a scene. And to me, this is the genius of Anne Tyler, is that she writes and you think, but you come to the end of the book and you think, okay, so nothing much happened, which is always what the critics talk about and her fans talk about as well. So nothing much happens, technically speaking, and as she said, if anybody wants to read my books because of the plot, well, they shouldn't, because that's not really the way I write, except that if you think about it, life is her plot. And that's really what it is. The passing of years is her plot. So you have to like character, and you have to be interested in the psychological aspects of people and why they behave and why they do what they do. Families, as in many of her books, families are at the core of the story, and in this one, multi-generational family saga, that's what this one is. And the way she sets it up really is, and it's a very, you have to think about it, because when you read it, she's very easy to read. Her prose there's nothing fancy about it, but that's her talent, is that it takes a very good writer to be able to write in such a way that her writing doesn't hit you in the face. There's nothing flashy, there's nothing, there's no tricks about her writing, but a choice word, just a sentence here and there, stuck in the middle of a paragraph about something, sticks in your mind. And she is so good. I mean, she really is excellent at describing people and describing the drama of everyday life. So she divides it roughly a decade a chapter, except for the first chapter. And the first chapter, and there'll be another chapter on a train also, and with some of the setting in the train station. The first chapter is March of 2010, and you have, if you remember it, there is a young woman and her boyfriend, and they're taking a train from Baltimore to Philadelphia and back, and they're going to visit the boyfriend's parents. And we don't know who the young woman is. Her name is Serena Drew, and who her boyfriend is and what's going to happen with them. But there's the description of this meeting of the boyfriend, of this trip with the boyfriend. And when Serena is going, she's standing in the train station, she sees someone, she sees someone and she remarks to her boyfriend. And the purpose of this trip to Philadelphia was that she's never met her boyfriend's parents before, because she lives in Baltimore, where Anne Tyler, that's the setting of her books. Anne Tyler sets her books in Baltimore. Once in a while, she ventures a little bit further afield, but briefly, but her main setting is Baltimore. And when she was asked about that, she says, I don't know, it's my city, it's where I've been living. It's not where she was born, but it's where she was living since she was a young woman, and when she was married and when her husband was alive and when her 2 daughters were at home. And she's never, as she says, I thought about setting my books in other places, and as I thought about maybe moving somewhere else, but I just don't want to. Baltimore is my city, and that's where, so some writers like, I don't know, you can think of other writers who have a place where they set their stories. Let's say Alice Munro, for instance, sets her stories mainly in that area of southwestern Ontario. That's particularly her territory. So Baltimore, if you think of Anne Tyler, you think of Baltimore. And so you have this young woman who lives in Baltimore, whose parents live in Baltimore, but her boyfriend is from Philadelphia, but I guess her boyfriend is in school because that's where they met, and she's never met his parents, and he wants her to come home. He wants to introduce her to his parents. So they take the train and they go. And just the way she describes, like it's just so Ann Tyler, that a sentence here, a sentence there, a choice of word, a choice of what to include, and you get a sense of who the characters are. So how does she open the book? This had chapter 1. This happened back in March of 2010. And then we'll find, if you notice, at the beginning of each chapter, the first sentence tells you what the year is. So she sets it. So there's no wondering, what year am I? She tells you very clearly. So the opening chapter is March of 2010, when the Philadelphia train station still had the kind of information board that clickety-clacked as the various gate assignments rolled up. Back in March of 2010, it was like, okay, more than a decade ago, but there's a historical fiction, but it was just interesting because it made me think, wow, 2010, it doesn't seem like that long ago, that still had the kind of notice board that clackety-clacked when the information changed. Serena Drew stood directly in front of it, gazing intently at the listing for the next train to Baltimore. Why did they wait so long to post their gates here? In Baltimore, they told people farther ahead. So they're on their way back now. Her boyfriend was standing beside her, but he was more relaxed. Having sent a single glance toward the board, he was studying his phone now. He shook his head at some message and then flipped on down to the next one. The two of them had just had Sunday lunch at James's parents' house. It had been Serena's first meeting with them. For the past 2 weeks, she had fretted about it, planning what to wear. Jeans and a turtleneck, finally the regulation grad student outfit, so as not to seem as to be trying too hard, and scouring her mind for possible topics of conversation. But things had gone fairly well, she thought. His parents had greeted her warmly and asked her right away to call them George and Dora, and his mother was such a chatterbox, but that conversation had not been an issue. Next time, she told Serena after the meal, you'll have to meet James's sisters too, and their honey's and their kitties. We just didn't want to overwhelm you on your very first visit. Next time, first visit, that sounds encouraging. And then she's just relieved, and it goes on. And so, but then as they're standing in the train station, Philadelphia's train station was more imposing than Baltimore's, and there's always this feel in her books that because Ann Tyler is so comfortable in Baltimore, and Baltimore is her place, that when her characters have to go other places, they get a little nervous. So New York City is going to come up in one of the chapters later on. That's really a big deal. But even Philadelphia is making this young woman, Serena, I guess she's a grad student, right? It says and we get that bit of information just because what is she deciding to wear to this meeting with the parents, like a turtleneck and jeans, grad student, like regulation attire. So Philadelphia's train station was more imposing than Baltimore's. And she describes it, and as Serena is admiring the luggage that people are rolling by with, she notices this young man, and she says, oh, and then her boyfriend kind of looks up from his phone for a minute and says, I think that might be my cousin, she says. Where? That guy in the suit. You think it's your cousin? I'm not really sure. They studied the man, and they this young man, and so this is like where we're going to get to in this book. You think it's your cousin, so the boyfriend doesn't understand. What do you mean you think it's your cousin? You don't know what your cousin looks like? It might be my cousin Nicholas, Serena said. Maybe he just resembles Nicholas, James said. Seems to me if it was really him, you could say for certain. Well, it's been a while since we've seen each other, Serena said. He's my mom's brother's David's son. They live up here in Philly. So just go ask him, why not? But if I'm wrong, I look like a fool. And then what does James do? He manages, right? He goes over, and you remember that, and he kind of goes near this guy, and he says softly, Nicholas, and figuring, okay, if the guy, you're attuned to your own name, so if the guy turns around, then it is. And sure enough, it is this Nicholas. He brings him over to his girlfriend, Serena, who they've been going out for 8 months, we find out, so it's still a pretty new relationship, and says, here's your cousin, and they look at each other, and there's this little awkward, like when we do, we shake hands, they kind of give each other a hug, well, hey, what are you doing here? And they're not even sure, and they start to talk, and Nicholas says, your mom is Alice? No, Lily. So the Nicholas, the cousin, doesn't even know who which one of the sisters is, and it's not such a large family, is the mother. So And they talk a little bit, and James, the boyfriend, is standing there, and he just doesn't get this because he knows all his cousins, all 11 of them. Serena only has 5. They have a discussion afterward. How could you not know? And so it's going to be about families, and it's going to be about family connection, and it's going to be about what makes a family and what makes a family stick together. But then there's this good line, and so anyway, then they awkwardly, they have this little chat, and they trying to figure out if they can find something in common to talk about, and somebody's funeral, and when they last saw each other, and then they said, okay, so then James says, okay, like speaking of getting back, we should head to our gate now. Oh, okay. Well, she says to her cousin, I'm so glad we ran into you. Good seeing you too. And he smiles and he walks away. And he says, tell your family hello here. She says to him, I'll do that, he called back. And Serena and James are looking after him, and then they're going to their gate. And what's James' comment on this? James, the boyfriend, says, I have to say, you guys give a whole new meaning to the phrase, once removed. And then they go back and they continue on this train and they have a discussion. And you wonder here, and then they talk about the visit, and it comes out that James really wanted to stay overnight. But Serena did not want to stay overnight because there was that awkwardness of were they going to sleep together in his old bedroom? And she says, no, of course not, she wouldn't want to do that. And he says, but it's critical. And anyway, she gets her way, meaning they come and go on the same day, even though it's a long, like a couple of hours each way. That's all they do. So, by the end of the interchange and this little scene, you're wondering, are they going to stay together or not? Like, are we going to, but, and at the end of it, they have this, they go on the train together, and what is she remembering? She's sitting next to him on the train ride back, and she's remembering, Serena, that her best friend in high school had been a boy. It wasn't a romance, it was kind of more of a mutual aid society. That this boy had been was a little bit strange looking, and everybody made fun of his strange name, Marcellus Avery. And Serena also had not been in high school. It was not a good time for her. She was a little bit overweight, and she wasn't good at any kinds of sports. And then now looking back, now that she's all of a grad student, how many years later, she's still young, but she says, looking back, she realized that this boy, who everybody had found so strange, had been absolutely beautiful to look at. His head had the most perfect shape, like a marble statue's head. And for some reason, it had always made her think of how much his mother must love him. She wondered where he was today, probably snatched up in marriage by someone, she thought, some woman smart enough to recognize his worth. And here Serena sat next to a boy who was no different from her classmates back in high school. All she could think about was how long it would be before this train ride came to an end and she could be on her own again. So kind of know, well, she realizes, but it's an interesting scene, an interesting opening scene to the story, because you think, like, what does this have to do with anything? But then you'll find out what it has to do with this. So that's the opening scene, 2010, the opening chapter. The second chapter goes back to 1959, and this is where we meet the Garrett family. And so we're going to meet Serena, who's the young woman here, her mother when she is a young girl, and her grandparents. So that chapter 2, where we're told the setting, opens with the sentence, the Garrett family did not take a family vacation until 1959. So that's going to be the first time. And we meet the parents, Robin Garrett. So Robin and Mercy are the grandparents of the family. I mean, they're not grandparents here, but they're going to be by the end of the story. And they have 3 children, 2 girls, Alice, a very sensible, kind of bossy character. Her younger sister, and Alice is 17 when we meet her here. The younger sister is Lily, and she's a boy crazy 15-year-old, very irresponsible and very fluffy and flighty, it seems, and their little brother, David. And then we find out that Nicholas, the cousin here, who we meet, is David's son. And David is 7 years old, and he's a very intense, serious little boy, and he's a little bit odd. He keeps to himself, and his relationship with his father is not so great, we find out. But at the beginning, in this opening scene, they're going on vacation. And there's a description, again, maybe that's a historical fiction, the family vacation in 1959. The first vacation their family had ever taken, because the father, Alice's father, said they couldn't afford a vacation. But finally they do. They go away and they rent a cottage. And again, she writes, in 1959, Alice was 17 years old, way past the stage where traveling with her family could be any kind of thrill. And her sister Lily was 15 and madly in love with Jump Watkins, a rising senior at their high school and a champion basketball player. She could not possibly leave her boyfriend for a whole week. When she asked if he could come with, the father said no. He didn't even bother giving a reason. He just said, what? No. And that was that. So they go on this vacation and they set out and they rent this cottage. And there's a description, and that whole first chapter is just such a good description of a vacation of the parents and their 3 children, and 2 of the older girls don't want to be there. And we meet the family. And I thought it was such a good introduction to the characters. And at that very beginning, so you meet Robin, who is this, he's a plumber who he inherited his business, and he's doing the best he can. He seems to be, he's a very straight, serious kind of fellow. And the mother, Mercy, is an artist. And what's interesting about the story, and as the book goes on, and as the years go on, and the marriage between Mercy and Robin is described, you realize that, so it's 1959, so remember what was going on in 1959, it was the beginning of the feminist movement, it was, the 60s, women, though, till then, because we find out that the couple got married in 1940, because then when there's the 50th anniversary party later on, remember Robin he decides he wants to make a surprise anniversary party for his wife. He doesn't want her to know, because kind of on the week he's afraid that if she finds out that he's making her a party that she won't want to come. So they're married in 1940, and Mercy, the wife, is all of 20 years old when they get married, and she's a housewife and a mother. She has her 3 children, and that's what women did in those days. There was no question about doing anything else, although we find out that she really wanted to be an artist, that she always really dreamt of going to Paris to study painting. But then when this Robin comes along, Robin Garrett, and he's a very serious, intense young man, and she says yes, he proposes to her, and they get married, and she becomes a housewife. But the story, which is really interesting, because Anne Tyler has been, by certain reviewers, looked a little bit down upon in maybe more highbrow literary circles as writing women's stories, which is a kind of misogynistic way of saying that anyone who writes about daily activities and tells family stories, that's a little bit not as important as whatever great literature written by men, or it could be written by women as well, but the topic of Anne Tyler's work is one that's, so, and yet, as one reviewer very astutely pointed out, this book is, the character Mercy she's a product of her time. She got married in 1940. Women who got married did not usually go out to work unless they had to, but in this case they didn't. Her husband was making a decent living and able to provide for his family, even though, as he said, they couldn't afford a vacation until 1959, but still they were okay, and she did work. But her painting, that was something that she had wanted to do from a young age, which she put aside because that's what she did when she got married. She took care of the house, and she had her children, and she took care of her children and her family, but she still wanted to paint. And slowly through the story, she gets what she wanted to do. And that's, I think, maybe you could say, the drama of the book is how Mercy comes to do what she wanted to do. And she slowly, remember at one point her kids grow up, and when her youngest son, when David, there seems to be, so Lily is 15 and David is 7, an 8-year difference. When David goes off to college, and Mercy and Robin are empty nesters, then Mercy starts to do something that she had been obviously thinking about for a while. She rents herself a little studio. But we first find out about her painting in that scene when they go on vacation. Because remember, so what do they do on vacation? So this is kind of a test for family, right? You go on vacation and you have to spend your time in this little cabin. And if there's a rainy day, then you really have to figure out, like you're in very close quarters. And she, right from when we first meet her, we get the idea, yeah, she's a kind enough, nice enough lady, but there's something a little bit flighty about her, or a little bit, she's interested in her painting, and that seems to be more interesting to her as the years go on. But even back then, what does she do? She goes off and she goes painting. She leaves the kid, well, Lily goes off, finds a boy next
She
door.
doesn't make the meals, is what it's-
And she doesn't make the meals, and she never cooked. So that's also an interesting, she had to cook a little bit, because then there's this mention of the meal, right? Because at the 50th anniversary party, what does her husband do? Salmon loaf. He makes the meal, the first meal, remember that salmon loaf, right? That she made when they first got married. Because first the daughter Alice said, well, you're making a birthday party, like who's gonna cater? I'll do it, Dad, or you're gonna cater. No, I'm gonna take care of this myself. And he makes this salmon loaf. So Mercy was not from the big, she did what she had to do. She made meals, she fed her family, but that was nothing that she was ever really interested in, because it was her art. So it turns out to be, she turns out to be quite a feminist, not, like particularly trying, and it's not said in any kind of loud way, but this, and another thing, if you remember, each of the chapters are told from a different narrative perspective. It's always third person narration. Alice did this, or Mercy did this, or Robin felt this, like each chapter from a different third person, but from a different point of view. So you really do get to know the different characters, because the story is told from their point of view. And so in this scene where they go on this 1 week vacation, something happens there too. And so you have to pay attention, and especially if you read the book twice, you realize what happens, because in this scene where they go on vacation, we realize that Mercy is really interested in her art, that Robin is very uncomfortable and not good at going on vacation, so it was a good thing that they never did, because he really didn't like it. The two girls are teenagers, they don't want to be there. Alice, the very bossy, sensible one, who says at one point she felt older than her mother, because her mother really just was still, and did they not realize that when the 15-year-old Lily was going off every morning with this boy, like what was going to be going on? And it's Alice who finally one day, when she comes back to the cabin and the door is locked to the bedroom that she shares with her sister, and her parents aren't around, and her mother is off painting somewhere, and she's the one who bangs on the door because she's worried about what her sister is getting into, because her sister is so, so silly and boy crazy that she doesn't realize that this 21-year-old is not going to propose to her in the gazebo by the water. You think, what does he want to do? He doesn't want marriage. He looks like he sees this 15-year-old girl so you get Alice's perspective, but what happens there, which I don't know if you remembered it, but it comes back at the end of the book, when we have been with the Garrett family for 60 years, that we realize that David, the little 7-year-old, doesn't know how to swim. And there's a scene where Mother's off painting, Lily's off with the boy. I don't know, Alice, if she was down there at the time. The father is standing in the water with the guy who rented the cabin next door, and they're standing and talking. And little David really doesn't want to learn how to swim. He just wants to be on the beach playing with his sand toys, or he has these imaginary figures, and he's always creative and making up dramas with his. They decide that he should learn to swim, and he almost drowns. But it's not made a big deal out of, except that you realize by the end of the book, when David talks about his relationship with his late father, and he's a man of 68, 70 years old at the end, this incident is still as clear as if it had happened yesterday in his mind, because it's terrifying. And I think if anybody has almost, drowned swimming, or you once, and I think, it's happened to many kids, that you somehow, whether on purpose, somebody throws you into the water, or you get thrown into the water and you don't know how to swim, it's really scary. but the parents don't realize, and it's the neighbor, ironically, who plucks little David out of the water before something, I mean, there could have been a tragedy. The book could have been called An American Tragedy. So that one little incident, and in every chapter, something happens. So yes, there's no plot in the sense of plot other than life and the events that happen, which is, isn't that the biggest plot that there ever could be when you look back on a life? So that's what happens in this. They go on the vacation. Mercy goes off. We realize how much the mother is interested in her art versus taking care of her family. And little David almost drowns. And then the third chapter, it's another 10 years later, but she does it in such a way that it doesn't seem forced. So 1959 was the vacation. Next chapter is 1970. And in this chapter, so it's about another decade later, the two parents, Robin and Mercy Garrett, drove their son David, who had almost drowned in that previous section, to Pennsylvania to start his freshman year at college. They settled him into his room, and they look around and they're really nervous for him because he's not the most outgoing, gregarious fellow, and they're worried, is he gonna have a good time? You know, parents worry when they send their kids away to school in the United States because they go away and they could go away far. And now they're empty nesters. And now what's gonna happen to them? And things kind of have to change. Well, for Robin, he still goes to work because he's had his job, but what about Mercy now? The mother who really has nobody left at home. So what does she do? And in this chapter, this is also a very big thing. Done in Anne Tyler's understated, you have to pay attention to see what's going on here. She's about to leave her husband, which is, you know, in another increments, but she does it in such a way, she really does it in such a way. So David leaves, and she's feeling very, like, it's hard when your youngest child leaves home and empty nest, but she didn't expect to feel so down. But, and then Anne Tyler writes this, but even so, Mercy had a plan in mind, and one of the many emotions that she was feeling as they drove home from taking their youngest son to school, the predominant one was anticipation. So it's not sadness or, you know, loneliness or anticipation. And the next paragraph, on Monday morning, as soon as Robin left for work, Mercy went to her closet and retrieved a flattened, sun-kissed carton she picked up at the supermarket. She opened it out, reinforcing the bottom with packing tape, and started filling it with clothes. Not all her clothes. Oh no. To look at her bureau drawers, once she'd rifled them, you would never suppose anything was missing. So like she's so good. She even takes clothes, not that many, rifles the drawers so that if anybody looks into her drawers, it doesn't look like she took all her clothes and left 2 t-shirts. Knit tops remained, but just the ones she didn't wear very often, the faded ones, the unbecoming ones. Underpants remained, but just the ones with the waistbands going. The carton was not over large. She had to be able to carry it for several blocks, and she didn't pack it too tightly. Plenty of clothes still hung in her closet that she hadn't even looked at yet, but she had all the time in the world for that. So, what's she up to? I mean, again, and you're reading this, like, wait a minute, what's happening? She's leaving, and she's rented this studio. And what's the studio? The studio is this small room on the top of a little house, a white clapboard house. It wasn't supposed to be lived in. There was a tiny bathroom in the rear, and there was a space, and there was a little kitchen area, was a linoleum top sink counter with a hot plate on top of it, and a miniature fridge, and a little table, and a single chair. But that was her studio. She loved it. She told her husband, she told him she's renting a studio. She proposed it 3 years ago when both of her daughters were long gone. And he said to her, but why can't you just paint in the girls' room? The girls' room is empty. The girls' room is our guest room. They never had overnight guests. But so she's got her plan, and that's what she does. And slowly she brings her towel, a washcloth, a set of linens, a flannel blanket, and she makes up her bed. And she does this very slowly. Meanwhile, they're waiting for letters from their son, who really does not write them very much. He doesn't even come home very often, it turns out. He seems to be quite happy to have been away. And while he's not coming home, Mercy is slowly moving her things out. But she doesn't tell anybody. And that's one of the beauties of this story, that throughout the whole book, there's all, so it looks at families, their connections, the way people are close to each other or not. And I say that opening chapter when Serena meets the cousin and they're not, she's not sure that he really is her cousin, and the then boyfriend at the time says, like, I don't get this. Like, what do you mean? You're so not close to your family? What kind of a family is this? And that's really what the book is about. What kind of a family is this? And over the decades, we get to see what kind of a family this is. What the French braid, which she describes, like, says at the end what she meant by the French braid, what it is, that even though this family might seem not to be close in certain ways, their lives are still very interwoven with each other. And we get the story of what happens to the daughters. There's Alice and there's Lily, and they get married and they have children. And then Lily gets divorced and marries again. And meanwhile, Mercy is spending more and more time at her studio. But even by the end of the book, the daughters say to each other, nobody ever said that Mom moved out. Like, she moved out, but it was never anything that anybody would mention. And even Mercy herself, because she doesn't want to hurt her husband. She still loves him, but she needs to be on her own, and she needs to paint. And yet, what is she painting? So this idea of painting, it's interesting. I mean, what's she painting?
She didn't grow with her painting. She stayed painting the same house, what a house feels like.
People's homes.
But she never grew, like it just stayed stagnant.
So, but what's interesting is that what's her art? So when she tries to make, she definitely can't make a living out of it. She tries, but again, it's a little bit late in the game because she didn't go to art school. She wasn't able to study. She's doing this on her own. But then she gets this idea, because what interests her? It's home. It's home, but it's not like she doesn't paint traditionally. She finds something, a particular object in someone's home, and she emphasizes that, and the rest is kind of in the background. So when she tries to make a commercial venture of it, like, where would she sell this? Maybe to realtors, she has this idea that, and when Lily's second husband, Morris, is a realtor, and he says, well, why don't you give me some of your business cards if you're painting people's houses, portraits? She says, I paint portraits, but portraits of houses, not of the people, of houses, but I choose one thing that catches my eye. So it could be the newel post on a stairwell, or it could be, I don't know, a sewing basket or a part of a sewing basket in a room in a house. So not exactly commercially very, it's not going to be very successful. If you want to paint pictures of people's houses, especially, and the idea is that people have bought a house and they'll be proud of it. And so, if you do a beautiful painting, maybe people will be interested in buying it, but not if you're just going to paint one little tiny detail of their house. Like, you could be very artsy, but that's not going to be, not going to work as a business venture. So she never really makes a business venture out of it, but that's what she continues to do. I mean, she has the luxury of not having to worry. She's able to pay the rent, I guess, because Robin does okay in the store. Her Mercy's family's store, the plumbing store, becomes the family business. And that family business continues until remember that by the end, Wellington's Plumbing Supplies, or whatever they're called, but Wellington's is still around in 2020 at the end, and it's a grandson or a great-grandson or a great-great-grandson of the original owner by that time who's running the store. And so it's still a viable business, which also says something to the continuity. But it's just interesting what her painting is, this whole idea that she leaves her husband but doesn't say anything. She goes and she paints because and it's kind of a typical, in a way, of, let's say, the 60s and 70s of feminist literature, that the woman, remember, what was the book? Marilyn French. What was her book? She leaves her husband, right? And what was it called? Do you remember that book? Marilyn French's, it was such at the time, I remember reading it, and it's about, so this idea that women, you know, that they were repressed and oppressed, and that their role, especially, a woman's room. Yes, so it's kind of made me think of a woman's room, because this is her woman's room, only she doesn't do it for any feminist reasons. She just always really wanted to paint, and she did it from the time that she was young, only she was never able to do it. And that's the way, you know, the way things were. She got married, she had kids, like there was no question about her going out to work, because that's not what women did in those days, which is what Anne Tyler exactly writes. But she does it, and she leaves her husband, but in such a way because she wouldn't want to hurt him, because she knows he loves her. And he said to her, please don't ever leave me. I couldn't bear it if you leave me. And we find out that Robin, he was an orphan from an early age, and when she meets him, when Mercy meets him, he's this earnest young plumber, and he comes, and you think, well, why did you marry him? Like, I don't, and in a lot of the cases, you look at the marriages and you think, why would she marry him? Like, maybe Alice and her husband seem fitted, but Lily and the first husband, that motorcycle guy in the leather jacket, seemed like a Lily kind of guy, except that doesn't last because he's not interested in her. And then who does she marry? She marries nice, kind, staid Morris, the realtor, who only has good things to say about people, and that's a wonderful marriage.
Yeah.
That's who she married. Then she marries again, surprisingly, in the last part of the book. And another thing about, Lily got married. She didn't even tell anybody that she's getting married. But Robin and Mercy also. Mercy is this artsy young woman, and she marries Robin, this plumber whose pronunciation of words and grammar isn't really, but they get married, and she does leave him to move into her studio, more or less, but not really. She doesn't do it out loud. And that marriage lasts in its way. It's because things were not talked about. So that's another thing to say, is this idea of, does everything have to be brought out into the open? Does everybody have to, like nowadays you would say, how could you do that? How could you not discuss what's going on? So there's this idea that maybe not everything has to be talked about and discussed. There are ways of coping and ways of having a family dynamics are very complicated, and family relationships are so complicated. And just even from that beginning bit where we don't realize that when David is almost drowned, because not a big deal is made out of that. Maybe another writer would it would be an event in the plot, and the child almost drowned, but in Anne Tyler, no, you realize though, if you read carefully, he almost drowned. But it's not mentioned again until the end, when David is talking to his wife Rita, and this comes up, the fact that he said, I don't think my father really ever much liked me, like we were never really alike. I never was interested in how things worked, and I'm sure he expected the kind of boy who would be interested in how things work. My father was a plumber. And then if you remember the occasions, that why does David go away to college and never really contact his parents again? And then he stays away. He becomes an English and drama teacher, and then he appears in another chapter. There's another decade later where he appears and he wants to introduce them to a woman. And there's a woman, like they haven't heard anything, who's this woman? And in comes David with a woman who's older than he is. She has a slight limp. She comes with a daughter. She looks a little bit foreign. It turns out she's not really foreign. She grew up in Minnesota, but I guess if everybody lived in Baltimore, so anything not Baltimore is foreign. So there's this daughter. There's the looking a little bit foreign. There's the limp. There's the fact that she's, like, as the sisters say, decades older than he is. Turns out she's 11 years older. She's not decades older, and he's enamored with her. And he brings her to meet the family, and there's this whole description of that family dinner, and what are they going to make, and who makes the food, and the awkwardness. And she is really an expert at that, describing people, and just all the things that we might notice but can't even put into words or into clear thoughts in our head. And Tyler writes them down and puts them on paper and puts them in front of us. So you have that dinner, and David brings home the Greta and her daughter. Doesn't say he's going to marry her, but the family's thinking, oh, he's never. Why has he stayed away all those years? And so that comes out, not in any great psychoanalytical way, but it comes out that David feels like his father, he never really got along so well with his father, and his father even, and he's a certain character, and a man of his time, and a man of his circumstances and upbringing. Robin never had, his parents died when he was young. He lived with this very austere aunt of his, so he didn't know anything about warmth and loving. And this boy is a disappointment to him because he's not a real boy. He's more interested in his playing with his dolls and in his imagination. And remember, for 2 summers, he makes him take a summer job. He won't let him do the theater job that he wants to do. He makes him take a real job. And the real job, he gets him a job with a plumbing crew on a construction site, which David detests every single day. And then doesn't come home after that. So, there's another something. And then he marries this Greta. And we only find out at the very end, this is also the way Anne Tyler works. How did the two of them meet? Well, we find out that she's a nurse in the school where he's a drama teacher, but it really only comes out in the end how they each fell in love with each other, got married within six months of having met each other. And that's another decade in the story. Then the next chapter is, so that's chapter 4. In chapter 5, that's the 50th wedding anniversary party where Robin wants to make her, he remembers. And when did they, one reviewer, I didn't pick up on this, but says, what was their anniversary date? July 5th. So as this reviewer said, maybe this is Anne Tyler's sly allusion to, that's the day after Independence Day. So this is when Mercy, who wants her independence after that, doesn't have her independence anymore. Anyway, there's this and by this time, you feel so like he's so well-meaning and intense and stolid, this Robin, and he loves his wife. And nothing is said of the fact that, so she has her studio. Okay, that's fine. She paints, she has her studio. That's it. You could tell anybody that your wife paints and she goes to her studio, and some nights she doesn't come home because she gets so caught up in her painting. So no mention is ever made. The kids never say anything to him because they don't want to hurt his feelings. But they all know that their mother has moved out. I mean, they're not so stupid, even if they don't live right nearby. Then there's that party, right? The whole scene with the party. And who do they get to call the mother to make sure she'll come? Because Robin is afraid that if he calls Mercy and says, come, she won't. So ask David, the son, to call to say, because he lives out of town, that he's coming, and then Mercy shows up and she's surprised by the party, and the party, I guess, is a success. And after the party is over, then Mercy says to Robin, thank you very much for making the party, but please don't ever, ever do that again. I don't like surprise parties. And he said, I know, but he had to do it. So that ends up, that was quite a nice scene. And then in the next chapter, then we meet again. There's the other scene on the train. We have one of Mercy's granddaughters. They call her Candle, but she's really, her name is Kendall. And remember at the beginning, at that opening scene where Serena, the other granddaughter, meets her cousin and says, oh, yeah, we were at somebody's funeral and Candle was there, and James, the then boyfriend, says, you have a cousin called Candle? And they say, no, her name is really Kendall, but she couldn't pronounce it when she was learning to talk, so her name has been or we called her Candle. So we meet Candle on another train ride when Candle is interested in painting, and Candle's mother Alice, the older bossy daughter of Mercy and Robin, says, well, your grandmother is an artist and she paints, maybe you want to go and spend some time with her. And they develop a relationship, and there's that beautiful relationship between the grandmother and the granddaughter, who haven't been particularly close to them, but because of art. And then the scene where the grandmother says to Candle, would you like to come to New York? A friend of mine is having an exhibit. We'll take the train, we'll come back the same day, in kind of an echo of the first scene of the book. Different characters, different place, but two people on the train. And they go to New York, and young Kendall, wow, she's in New York City. Mainly she wants to buy Nathan's hot dogs, like that's what she says to her grandmother, Grandma, can we buy those hot dogs? Because my friend in school talks about them all the time. When she goes to New York City, you have to have Nathan's hot dogs. Yes, says her grandmother. They have this meeting, they meet the artsy friend of Mercy from who they've gone to that brief when Mercy went for 1 year to art school before she got married. But this friend has turned into, if you imagine an artist to look like she's New York City and she has her exhibits in these small galleries. They go and on the train ride coming back, I don't know, I reread that scene.
That was amazing.
That was such
That
a
was
scene.
amazing.
They go and then Mercy says, oh, I'm so sorry, Kendall. And Mercy calls her Kendall. She's the one who calls her by her proper name. Kendall, we didn't get you the hot dogs. It's okay, Grandma, Kendall says, it's okay. And then she was already starting to feel a little uncomfortable, nervous about the train ride, and they sit on the train. And when you reread that scene, when you read the first time, you don't pay so much attention, but when you go back after that Mercy dies, it seems, and then just the little details, like going there, Mercy was so that she had to sit next to her granddaughter. Coming back, she said, oh boy, I'm really tired. Boy, that was such a long walk, to get into the train. And Kendall's thinking, what's such a long walk? I don't know, but I guess because Grandma's old. And then they sit down and Grandma doesn't care whether they find 2 seats together, the train is crowded. She sits down, and again, she took out her handkerchief and she wiped her face because, that she was perspiring. You don't think of this till afterwards when you realize it seems like she had a heart attack on the train, but very quietly. And then she just closes her eyes, and the whole ride back, Kendall thinks her grandmother's sleeping, and she's tired. And then when she tries to wake her up at the end, Grandma, and Grandma doesn't wake up. And then she looks in her eyes, and then Kendall, and she's still a little girl, what is she, 13 years old, calls this nice the porter on the train, and she says, I can't wake my grandma up. And he's like, he looks at Grandma, and he says, oh, okay. And then he says, come, dear, let everybody else get off, and you'll come and put your things down here. And he takes her to where his things are, and that's how. And then Mercy is the first one to go. And so that's how, which is also, the art. And Mercy goes, but just the description of her by then. So she's an older woman, and Aunt Tyler she's 80 years old now, and as she says, I'm an old lady, and I can write looking back. And I can write from all the decades, all the ages. And she says, I still remember childhood memories of my own, this Aunt Tyler talking. So they come back to me vividly. So I feel like I can write children, I remember the awkwardness and the stress and the tension of adolescence. And I remember the 20s, the early youth, and then, but she can write all these ages. Chapter 7, the next chapter, both now Robin and Mercy are gone because Robin dies, we find out a year after his wife, because it seems like what was the point going on after Mercy is gone, and we find out who's married who. By this time, Serena, who we met at the very beginning with James, so she has not stayed with James, she's married to somebody else. She has a month-old baby, and is having a difficult time coping with the newborn. So Lily is moving. She's going to leave Baltimore, and she's going to go move near her daughter, because as she said, I better grab this window of opportunity, because Serena's going to realize all too soon that she can manage on her own. So if she wants me now, I better take advantage of this. And she's selling the things in her house. And there's that chapter where she's cleaning out her house, and she's giving away things. By this time, we find out that Alice, the bossy older sister, and her real estate developer husband, done very well. So they retired, they moved to Florida, where Kevin can golf all year round. And it's their son, Eddie, who's running the family business now. And the part comes out at the end that it turns out that Eddie is gay, but he's never told his family. And he's living with his partner. And how does it come out? It comes out when his Aunt Lily all of a sudden calls him up one day and says, I'm moving. And she tells him, I'm moving to be near Serena. I'm selling my house, and I've got some things here. You want to come around and see if there's anything that interests you? And Eddie's interested in lamps and takes a set of dishes and an armchair, because his partner, he realizes, would be very happy in this armchair. And they shot the armchair out and put it in one of their cars, and then there's the scene, but still Eddie has never told his family. And his partner says, you don't think that they know? no, they don't know, and I just said, he just was never comfortable telling them. And then, except that Aunt Lily goes into the house, and she sees who's living there, and then Eddie is like, he says, oh my goodness, my aunt, did you, and his partner looks at him and says, she knew. So don't you think your family's known all along? Like, even if you never told them, they know. And that's when Eddie realizes, yep, families work a certain way. And the last chapter is set during COVID, and it's when David, who married Greta, the woman from Minnesota, so she came into the marriage with a daughter from her first marriage, and then they have this Nicholas together, who is the cousin that Serena meets in the opening scene at the train station. Now, Nicholas is 68 years old. David is 68 years old, and he's retired because, as he says, COVID came, and he had to try and be a drama teacher and an English teacher on Zoom, and it was not good. He said he did not like the sound of his own voice, he just couldn't do it, so he decided to retire. Greta, who was 11 years older than him, retired as a school nurse years earlier, and it's COVID, and that's where the COVID period comes in, because, so how does she describe it? She uses it as a way of having Nicholas, the son, Greta and David's son, who's now a father of his own. He lives in New York City, and his wife is a doctor, and she has to work in the ER, and it's the height of COVID, and it's the height of very most difficult time at the beginning of COVID. And so Nicholas calls up and says, my wife she's never here, she's always sleeping in the hospital, or even when she's home, she can't be near us because she can't come near us. This was pre-vaccine time, and can we come and can you help us out? So Greta and David are thrilled to have their son and grandson come, and he comes and lives with them. And that's where you have this description of COVID time and how difficult it was, and people with their masks. Mm-hmm. And there's this interesting, I remember this with the masks, where Greta teaches her little grandson to sew. And he makes these little masks, and he's pretty good. I mean, although they look like, the stitching is a little bit uneven and they're a little bit off, but there's this sweet, nice description of the grandmother and the grandson sewing together, and this whole idea of people and distancing, and COVID was a whole other, how many books have been written about it. But what's interesting is that Anne Tyler takes it and she doesn't dwell on the horrors and the tragedies and the difficulties so much. They're definitely there. She mentions them in her way, but she puts it in, and it becomes very much part of the way people relate, don't relate, communicate, don't communicate, because wearing a mask adds a whole other dimension to communication and to families. And so, as I said, as plots go, Anne Tyler is not big on plot, but she has this very keen eye for the way that small moments can have unpredictable effects in a family's understanding of one another. And the rifts in families, how they can last for years, sometimes unfortunately are never solved, but sometimes they are. And among the ironies, one of the ironies, I think, of her reputation as a writer of domestic fiction. So I don't know if that's one of the other categories that the book is put into, literary, historical fiction, family sagas, but domestic fiction, which has this little bit of a, look down among, that's kind of a loaded term, is that she is, and this is, she writes about women, but she also has always a lot of male characters in her book. So she doesn't only write from the point of view of women, and in fact, I don't know if you would look at her books if it was even, I don't know, to take a survey of mainly women or like if there, but there's definitely a balance. And she's a very shrewd observer of men and of masculinity. And in a recent interview, she discussed her sense and she said, it must be very hard to be a man, because when you're young and not very sure of yourself, you're still expected to grow up to be in charge of things. And that's what comes through in all of her male characters. And so by the end of the story, you have, I know because it's after 3 o'clock, I don't know if you close the,
Oh, you're still
close the
going.
Zoom session? Okay, so where does the book get its title? I mean, there were so many quotable parts, but it's the last bit. It's the last bit. It takes place in 2020 when David and Rita have the pleasure, for them, the great pleasure and treat, COVID imposed, but of having their son Nicholas and their little grandson Benny stay with them. And David asks Rita one night, what is the name of that braid that starts high up on little girls' heads? High up on their heads? Emily used to have them. They would start with 2 skeins of hair up near her temples, very skinny and tight, and then join with the thicker braids down lower. Oh, a French braid, Rita said. Yeah, that's it. And when she undid them, her hair would still be in ripples, little leftover squiggles for hours and hours afterward. Yes, that's Rita saying. Well, David said, that's how families work too. You think you're free of them, but you're never really free. The ripples are crimped in forever. Rita started laughing. You are finding this out just now, she asked. He said, I'm a slow learner, I guess. And that's where the book gets its title. And then what's the end? So the end is when Nicholas and little Benny, they go back to New York. They had bought him a dog because they wanted a dog, just like many people bought dogs during, pets during COVID. So they buy him a dog, and Nicholas and Benny and the dog leave, and they go back to New York, which actually made me think, there was another part, do you remember this? When Mercy, who comes out to be not very, I mean, yeah, she was a good enough mother. She took care of her family the way she had to, but it was not the cat. So she has her land, so the landlord, right, she rents a room from this older couple, but she just wanted a studio. She's not interested in any more responsibility. She is so happy and relieved that she doesn't have to look after her kids anymore. I mean, she's bittersweet. Her son David goes away, and she's living in this studio, but she doesn't want responsibility. And one day, the landlord, the older man, comes upstairs and he says, I'm really sorry, but we're gonna have to leave. I don't know for how long. Our daughter is not well. Would you mind taking care of the cat? Okay, it's not gonna be for very long. He brings up all the equipment for the cat, and cats are usually pretty self-sufficient, and she gets used to this cat. Kind of company, so it's all fine. And then the older man comes back a little while later and he says, I'm sorry, but we're not coming back because my daughter is not well and we have to take care of our grandson. We can't take the cat. You'll take the cat? And Mercy really doesn't want to take the cat, but he says to her, please, 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 and she feels sorry for him because he's just so distraught because his daughter, by this time I remember, his daughter died, very, very sick, and so she doesn't want, and she sees that he's so heartbroken that she doesn't want to add to it. Okay, she'll take the cat. He brings up all this stuff to the cat, and what's the first thing that she does after he goes away? Which again was like, whoa, one of those moments in the book that you go, she doesn't say, and you would kind of expect, and one of the interviewers with Ann Tyler said, that bit about the cat. And Ann Tyler says, I know that, I was writing it and I thought, oh, this is not good, but Mercy does not want to take care of the cat. She's just gonna pack up all this stuff and she's gonna take the cat and drop it off at the animal shelter. And Ann Tyler says to the interviewer, there was nothing I could do about it because Mercy just she didn't want the cat. And then this leads you to a whole other thing when authors talk about their characters as if they have lives of their own, which Ann Tyler says, my characters have lives of their own. That's what really fascinates me about being a writer, and that's why I have to write. And that's why it's my world, because Ann Tyler's husband died 25 years ago, and she said that was the hardest thing that ever happened to me in my, so Montreal connection, that she came to Montreal to study at McGill. She studied, I forget what her undergraduate degree was, but she did library science at McGill, and she studied Russian, that was it. The Russian bibliographer at one of the McGill libraries for a number of years. That's where she met her husband, an Iranian psychiatrist, 20 years older than her, and they married. She had her 2 daughters who have Iranian names, and they lived in Montreal for a number of years. And she said, he was my life. And then at 65, he died of lymphoma. And that was 25 years ago in 1997, and she's never remarried. And so she's been alone for all those years. So the writing, lucky for her, she says, I know, I just keep writing these books, and I can imagine, she said, and I never read the reviews, because I would find it really hard if people wrote not nice. I don't want to read it, so I just write for myself, and every time I finish a book, and then I get this urge to write again, and I think to myself, oh, the world does not need another Ann Tyler book, but I just have to do it for myself. And then I kind of go to my publisher and say, or my editor and say, do you think maybe you want to read this? But she says, she said that I have no hobbies. It's a problem. So this is what keeps me going. And she continues to write. So and after Montreal, her husband got a job in Baltimore, and that's how they ended up in Baltimore, and that's where she's lived ever since. But she grew up in the Midwest, in the South and the Southwest. Her parents were Quakers. She was homeschooled until she was 11, she said, and that's always been part of her book, that there's always a child who felt a little bit not part of things. And she said, that was me, because I only went to school for the first time when I was 11 years old. I'd been homeschooled and living in these Quaker communities until then. So I was very awkward, and I didn't know how to be around. She was the oldest, she had 3 younger brothers, but she'd never been in school. And she says, I still clearly remember, and she's 80 years old when she's saying this, when I was 11 years old, I went to school for the first time, and one of the girls in the class looked at me and said, oh, so you're new, do you have a boyfriend? And Ann Tyler said, I said to her, but I'm 11 years old. And the girl said, yeah, I know, we're 11, do you have a boyfriend? And Ann Tyler said, that stuck with me because I felt I was coming from another world. So maybe that was, part of her, so that's the McGill connection. That's how she ended up in Baltimore. She's been alone, a widow for 25 years. But how does the book end? The book ends, Nicholas and little Betty have gone, and David and Rita are heartbroken, bereft, left on their own, very lonely, having to once again cope with the empty nesters, finding little bits of things that have been left behind, a little sock, a scrunch of fabric, one of the masks that little Benny had made, and then David starts to, in his mind, because little Benny had sung the song, that song and this is the song that never ends, that gets into, what's it called? An earworm that gets into your head and you can't. So the book ends with this little bit from that song. And it's David who ends the story, and he's remembering, he's trying to keep the memories of this wonderful visit of the son and the grandson, and he smells this little mask, he kind of puts it over his own face and draws in a deep breath. He could still catch a trace of Benny's little boy scent, salty but sweet, like clean sweat. He could still see Benny's seashell ears, he could hear his froggy voice. Some people started singing, not knowing what it was, and they'll continue singing it forever just because. He shook his head and smiled, and he put the mask in the box, and he went back to Rita, and that's how the story ends. So it's typical Ann Tyler in her typical multi-generational family stories, but it's yet another very perceptive, astute look at the way families are close and are not close, but as the French braid metaphor goes, whether you're close or not, how often you see family members or not, they're crimped into who you are, and they always will be. Questions, comments, anybody?
I just have to say one thing. I found the character of what's her name? The mother. Mercy. I found she was it was because of her and the way she was that the family was dysfunctional in a way. She couldn't communicate. She wasn't the mother that she should have been. That's number one. But number two, I don't understand why through the years the children didn't realize why their family, why they were like they were. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't say, well, mother, she really couldn't communicate. She really didn't.
But was it only the mother? Do you think it was only the mother?
I think it really stemmed from the mother, that she was she wasn't sort of I don't know, she was there, but she wasn't there. That's what I mean. And I know from families, sometimes if your mother is not a communicator or something goes wrong, the children through the years talk to each other and they discuss what happened? What was mommy like? Why were we like this? What?
Well, they do, every once in a while, they talk to Lily and Alice, you know, they
But
say
they
to
sort,
each
like, they
other.
didn't even speak to their mother about being left, our father. Like, there
Well,
was no.
but you could say it that, and there's one point in the book where they say, you know, family, so this is an example of families can be, yeah, they can do things that you look back and you say were mean and not, or, you know, cruel, or whether intentionally or not intentionally, because not always intentionally, but then there are all the unsaid and unspoken things that turn out to be kindnesses, like when Eddie realized, right, he doesn't want to discuss the fact that he's gay with his family, he doesn't feel comfortable talking about it, and then he realizes they knew all those years, and he remembers that when they were watching TV with you know, how they tried.
Nobody said anything.
No, but do you always have to speak about things?
I don't know, I think that that's part of that family, like, you know, you'll talk, like, I think.
I mean, each family communicates different ways.
Communicate, but I
Everyone has
mean,
different
nothing was
dynamics.
resolved, that's what I mean. I felt like it just kept going on, and it was never resolved. Nobody came out and said, well, maybe we should say about Eddie, accept him, you know, accept it, like.
But he never said anything to them.
Because he knew
so-
that, you know.
But would they have been disapproving? It turns out not. Like,
Well,
who
that's
knows, you know? So I think but what's interesting that she points out that there's a lot of in what you think might be cruelties were not necessarily cruelties. There was a lot of kindnesses, even though.
There's kindness, but there's nothing is real. You don't really get to the heart of the matter, you know, you don't get to the heart of it. Like, there's problems with the children, David with his father, and he never talks, like, they don't communicate
But
to
would
each
it have
other.
been any better if they would have?
I think so.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
I don't
honest
know,
talking
I don't
from
know.
because I have a sister, and my mother, may she rest in peace and everything, we know her weaknesses, and, you know, and maybe because I'm talking about personally, and we talk to each other about how we felt and everything, and we really discussed it, and maybe other families do that too. Nobody's perfect. Maybe my kids will talk about me, you know?
Everybody is.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like, they never spoke to each other. They never discussed their lives. They never discussed, mommy was like this, or daddy was like this, or maybe he's gay, or whatever. They never, somebody should have called up David and said, you know, called up and said, you can tell you know, he's gay, you can mention it, you can say it, talk to him, don't be afraid.
Well, that wasn't Dave, was that?
Yeah, I mean,
that
I'm
was-
getting
right,
mixed up with the
right.
children,
So,
it
yeah,
doesn't
I
matter,
don't
but
know. But you know what's
that's what
another
I'm saying.
interesting part, and I don't know if this has, because I read it and a little more about Ann Tyler, her own upbringing. So as I said, so Quaker, homeschool, grew up in these Quaker, like early childhood Quaker commune, but then she did, and I never heard this because she's notorious for, or known for not giving interviews. She did, like Salinger was known, you know, J.D. Salinger not to give interviews, and I forget which other writers. She didn't. Only recently a little bit more she does. So she said in an interview that her mother was very, very volatile. She doesn't use any other term, like she doesn't say, I don't know, bipolar or anything, but she just says very, very volatile, very easily angered. And she remembers she and her brothers, every morning, they would get up and they would listen behind the parents' door to see what kind of a day it was going to be and what mood their mother was. And then when I read that she was homeschooled till she was 11, thought, oh, then it must have been all the more so, because they didn't go off to school in the morning. They were home with this mother. And she said, and my father was a chemist, and he provided the stability in my family. That's Ann Tyler talking. So I guess she has also what to work with in her, you know, with the, I don't know, but it sounded, I don't know, it just, yes.
I just want to say, I didn't read the book, but it sounds like you could make a story about anybody's family if you're a writer.
Yes.
You know, I
Yes.
think that's what she did. She took a
Yes.
family, a fictional family,
Yeah.
and she made it into a story.
And that's what
It
she
could
does
be-
in many of her
It could
books.
be anybody's family.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
we were writers, we could probably
Yeah.
write a good story too,
Yeah.
because every
Yeah.
family has, you know, things that.
Right,
come
and
out
that's
of
the
it.
ordinary, and that's
Yeah.
the plotlessness, and it's just as the years go by, it's so interesting to observe what happens.
And maybe it's the way you, like, I came at it thinking, like my sister has a transgender granddaughter. And nobody and I said to her, talk to her about it, talk about it, my mother-in-law would have said nothing. But do it, learn from your life, and these children didn't, is what I'm saying, they didn't learn from that's how I feel.
I also think it comes to a point where you might want to say something, but that magic moment of saying something passes. And you get to that point where you
Too
say,
late.
it's too
Too
late.
late,
I need to
that's a
let it
good
go.
point,
Yeah.
good point.
So I have a feeling they may have talked about it briefly, but if they didn't have a receptive person
That could
who
be
wanted
it.
to, the moment got lost. She could have had a moment with Nicholas in the train station. She could have followed that. But sometimes it's just that wrong moment and the time
It
goes
could be,
by.
and it, all these generations, nobody, and that's how I
Because
came
there was
at it.
never, quote, the right time.
And
Good
isn't
point.
necessary, but what I think, like looking back, isn't necessarily better. Like, cause in the story, which is so, and it's those little moments that she's so good at getting, the little moments that we would not necessarily notice that are there, and that's what each chapter has, its something. So I don't know, and at the end where Lily gets married again, right, and she doesn't, and she doesn't tell anybody, cause how? So that's.
To me, like I want to take some of them and shape them.
No, but that's so
And
typical for this family.
And-
I mean,
That's
David
the
brings home
family.
Greta, and then it turns out they, oh yeah, by the
But
way,
when
writes
does
a
it-
letter, we got married.
Yeah.
Nobody shares
Ever?
the news.
And they say
don't
it to each other, or at least Alice is the one who says, how come we don't, why don't we talk to each other?
They don't.
Lily is.
Over 60 years, nobody breaks that chain of silence. That's how I looked at it. And it bothered me.
It bothered,
Yeah,
interesting,
It
yeah,
really,
yeah.
wake up, that's how I felt. Even though I
yeah.
love the book and I understood.
Yeah.
But like I wanted to say to, and like I wanted to say to the author, wake up, give us something to hold on to. Just don't give us this placid, shake it up a bit. She didn't shake it up, maybe.
So why do you think she didn't, why do you think she?
Well, I'm just,
I haven't read the book, so I'm just listening
I-
to what
I
you're
think-
saying. Why do you think Anne Tyler left it like that? With
Yeah.
people
This
wondering
family
why
didn't want to
they.
deal with unpleasantness, so they just pretended it wasn't.
That was their life.
That was their life.
That was their
Denial,
family
denial is a very
Yes.
powerful thing.
denial, it's
Families,
exactly the
Yes,
word,
they did.
denial. That's exactly, and that's
If I
what
don't
got me.
say it, it's not happening.
Yeah.
If she didn't announce to Robin that she left him, then it's not
Right.
official.
Which was, I mean, as you could say, that Mercy was very self-centered and that she, she had this, like her art over her family and her husband. That's the way so Anne Tyler, it seems like, writes very non-judgmentally. That she
This
makes
is the
her
way it is.
characters, right, or her characters come to her. I mean, we're talking about fictitious characters, so it's interesting, right? They're not real people, but in her mind, they're real people. That wasn't it a kindness of Mercy never to say to Robin, because he would have been heartbroken, and this way the pretense could go on. Mercy could have her studio and do her painting, and Robin would not, his heart wouldn't be broken. Although, look,
And it's interesting, her name was Mercy.
yes.
And if your
But she
heart
did it
is
in a
broken,
merciful manner.
if you break a heart or whatever in a family, somebody you love, because you want to show them, you want to tell them, you want to teach them, that's not such a bad thing either. She was walking on eggshells, that's what I'm saying. Can you do that when you're a mother? Can you walk on eggshells?
Why
with every-
not? In this case, why not?
To me, they have
Doesn't want to.
Would it have been better if she would have said to her husband, now the kids are grown and I don't have to be at home anymore and I really want to go and paint
If she
and I
were
really
more
want
honest
to
with
move out?
him, I think she should have been.
But she came home and she made him a meatloaf
Yeah.
and left him a note to
She
tell
did.
him, because she still loved him.
She still
just
loves
wanted to
him.
live with him.
She still loved him. She still
She
loved
still
him.
maintained a connection, so.
But how do you get away? You get away with that in real life? Can you do that in
People
real
do.
life?
Well,
I-
at least in the Anne Tyler, the story,
Yeah,
she did. I mean, I don't know, maybe.
it's more realistic and
You
not
know
as
what, it's
ideal.
probably not so odd, like if, for an artist who has their studio and spends a lot of time painting and
And there are couples who get married, they love each other, but they
Yeah.
just can't live in the
They
same
can't live in the
house.
same
They have
house.
their
That
separate
happens too.
houses.
So there's
He's
all
happy,
kinds
you
of,
know, I guess he's happy knowing that she's still his wife.
because for him, yes, he adores her,
Yeah,
and
so-
he's not capable, like
Exactly.
as in that scene when they go away on vacation in 1959, he's who he is, he can't be other. He didn't almost let his son drown out of premeditated cruelty, it just, okay. And then there was that one great line after, this is her brilliance, where Alice remembers that, oh, you know, Dad said that David had to learn to swim because he was 7 years old, and you know, we learned to swim when we were younger. I only learned to swim when I was 8 years old, Alice remembered. But Dad didn't remember that. You know, she says, it's good not to have to be a boy because there are not so many expectations put on you. That was her, you know, talking back, so.
I don't want to talk too much because we have to leave, but, excuse me, but I don't know how much he loved Robin. Like, I think the love sort of like dissipated. I don't think it was this wonderful love that she had for him. I think it was, you know, I think she sort of
Well, you
grew out
kind of
of
look
love
back
with
and
him.
think, so she was 20 years old, but remember, she says, so we got married, and when she goes to her father, who owned the store, and says, we're gonna get married, and her father says, well, you know, you're so young, you're 20 years old, wait a year, and she says, I'm all of 20 years old, why should we wait? So why would she marry Robin? Why didn't she go off to study art in Paris?
It's just that when she left him, she wasn't honest with him. That's exactly,
she
was
wasn't.
not honest with him.
No, she wasn't. She wasn't. She started slowly, but she had her idea. She knew what she was doing, and she had her idea, and it went on for all those years.
I mean, you
Didn't break his heart, but I mean, she broke his heart when she died, because then he died, you know, within a year. Because what was the use of living without her?